They didn't name me Grace to be ironic, but growing up, I often wondered if it was some kind of cruel joke. In a family of overachievers, lawyers, surgeons, entrepreneurs, I was the girl who spilled milk, missed deadlines, and cried too easily at everything. She's just, sensitive, they'd say, as if that excused my inability to be like them. No one ever said I was special. They called me soft, slow, and eventually the disappointment, like a stain on the family name that wouldn't wash out, no matter how hard I scrubbed at my own skin. At school, it wasn't much different. I wasn't bullied. That would have at least meant attention. I was ignored. Teachers looked past me. Friends forgot to invite me. I existed in the background like a misplaced comma in someone else's sentence. The silence wasn't just around me, it became me. I learned how to shrink, how to breathe quietly, how to not take up space. But the worst part wasn't the neglect. It was how normal it started to feel. You get used to invisibility, you get used to being the afterthought, and after a while, you even start to believe you deserve it. My brothers were graduating with honors. My cousin got into Harvard. I got a C in algebra and a sigh from my mom that said more than words ever could. That sigh became a soundtrack to my adolescence. I started writing in secret, journals at first, then letters I never sent, then pages and pages of thoughts no one ever asked for. I wrote about the cracks in our perfect dinner table conversations, about the loneliness of applause that was never meant for me. It became a habit, one I never thought would matter, but it kept me sane, kept me me. If I had any talent, it was bleeding emotions into words that no one ever read. Until one day, someone did. And that was the beginning of everything. It was a gray Thursday. The kind of day that feels like it's holding its breath. I remember that because it was the day I almost threw away the letter. I'd written it late the night before, after another dinner where everyone talked over me. I don't even think my father looked in my direction. I went to my room, pulled out my notebook, and wrote a letter addressed to anyone who's ever felt invisible. It wasn't meant for anyone in particular. It was just my truth, raw and ugly. I wrote about the dinners, the empty praise, the loneliness that clung to me like a second skin. I wrote about the pain of being compared, the exhaustion of trying to measure up, the silent screams behind my smile. At the end, I added one line without thinking. One day, you'll wish you listened. Then I folded the letter and slipped it into a book I was returning to the school library the next day. A total accident. Or maybe it wasn't. 2 days later, I got called into the guidance counselor's office. I thought I was in trouble. My heart raced as I walked down the hall. But when I opened the door, Mrs. Harper was sitting there, eyes red, holding my letter in her hands. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me like it was sacred. "Did you write this?" she asked. I nodded, terrified. She looked at me the way no one had in years, like I mattered, like there was something in me worth listening to. "Grace, this is powerful," she whispered. "I want you to read it at the school assembly next Friday." I almost laughed. Me? Speak in front of people? I could barely speak at dinner, but something inside me stirred. A flicker, a spark, the kind of feeling that only comes when you realize someone finally heard you. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry myself to sleep. The gym was packed. Rows and rows of restless students, half listening, half scrolling on their phones, waiting for the bell to set them free. My hands were trembling. I could barely hold the paper. Standing there, heart thundering in my chest, I realized I had two options: run or rise. I took a breath so deep it felt like I was pulling oxygen from another life. Then I started to read. My name is Grace, and I've been invisible most of my life. The room went quiet, not just less loud, silent. I kept reading. I told them about growing up as the family failure, about the shame, about how I learned to disappear in order to survive. My voice shook, cracked, but I didn't stop. Because every word was a scar that had waited too long to be seen. By the time I read the last line, "One day you'll wish you listened," I wasn't shaking anymore. They clapped. Some stood. I saw a girl in the back wiping tears. Even the ones who used to ignore me looked different now, like they were seeing me for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, I was seeing myself for the first time too. That letter became more than words. It became a mirror, and people started to see their own pain in mine. The school asked to publish it in the newsletter. Someone shared it on social media. Days later, it had been reposted by a mental health page with over 1 million followers. Comments poured in, people saying I had written exactly what they'd felt for years. And just like that, the disappointment started to disappear. Not because I changed who I was, but because I owned it. I wish I could say my family was proud, that they saw the video, read the comments, and finally embraced me. But that would be too easy. When the clip of my speech hit 100,000 views, my phone buzzed with texts, but not from strangers. From my brother, Marcos. "What is this performance?" From my mother. "Do we need to talk about boundaries?" My heart sank. It was like being yanked back into the shadows after finally touching the sun. At dinner that Sunday, no one mentioned the assembly, not even once. My father talked about the expansion of his firm, my cousin bragged about an award in robotics, and me, I just sat there, watching them sip wine and chew roast chicken like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. Until my aunt finally said, "So, you're a poet now." The laughter that followed stung more than any silence ever did. They weren't proud. They were embarrassed. I had cracked open our perfect image, and they couldn't stand the mess. My story wasn't convenient. It didn't make them look good. And in our house, appearance was everything. But here's the thing about being humiliated your whole life. At some point, shame loses its grip. I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I just watched. And inside, I promised myself not revenge in the loud, dramatic way they'd expect, but something more dangerous, silent revenge. I would rise in grace. I would outgrow them, outshine their titles, outlive their approval. My words, not their validation, would be my legacy, and I was just getting started. It began with one post. Someone had taken a line from my speech, "Being unseen doesn't mean you're unworthy," and turned it into a, quote, graphic, black background, white serif font, my name underneath. Just like that, I wasn't a whisper anymore. I was a voice. People reposted it. Writers, therapists, even celebrities. I saw my words on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, printed on mugs and notebooks I hadn't made. Suddenly, I was being quoted in places I'd never stepped into. Emails started coming in. A podcast invited me to speak. A small indie publisher asked if I'd ever thought of writing a book. People wanted to hear what I had to say, and not just about pain, about healing, about how to grow something beautiful in the space where worth was once denied. I couldn't believe it. The same girl who used to sit in the back of the class, scared to raise her hand, was now inspiring strangers around the world. And then came the call from my old school. They were doing a conference on resilience and mental health, and they wanted me as a keynote speaker. Me, the sensitive one, the failure, the disappointment. It felt surreal, like a joke, but one that finally played in my favor. The night before the event, I stared at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the same girl who wrote letters in the dark. My voice had shape now. My scars had meaning. And I realized maybe the pain wasn't a detour. Maybe it was the path. The auditorium was full. Teachers, students, guests from other schools, the kind of crowd that would have terrified me before. But now, I held the mic without shaking. I began my keynote with the words that had once lived in a dusty notebook. I used to think invisibility was permanent, but I was just looking in the wrong mirrors. The applause came easily, too easily, because while everyone else was clapping, the seat that mattered most stayed empty. My family didn't come. Not one of them. I had sent the invite. I had hoped foolishly that this would be the moment they'd see me, really see me. But the front row, reserved just for them, sat untouched like a wound that never closes. Still, I delivered every word. I shared the truth about being overlooked, about how dreams don't require applause, just persistence. I saw kids nodding, teachers wiping tears. One girl came up to me after and whispered, "Thank you. You just told my story." And for the first time, I realized something painful but freeing. Maybe I didn't need them to show up. Maybe I'd been waiting for the wrong audience all along, because while my family stayed in their comfortable silence, the world had started listening. My pain had become power, my silence a speaker, my invisibility a spotlight. That night, I walked off the stage into a sea of strangers who now felt like family. People who saw value not in my perfection, but in my honesty. And for the first time, I didn't ache for missing faces. I celebrated the ones who were present. 2 weeks later, my uncle died. A sudden heart attack. The family, of course, gathered in full force. Black suits, pearls, pressed handkerchiefs, all the performance of grief, but none of the vulnerability. I hadn't planned to go, but something inside me said I needed to. Not for him, for me. I wore navy blue, not to rebel, just to be honest. I wasn't mourning a man who never spoke to me unless it was about someone else's success. I was mourning what could have been. As I stepped into the chapel, heads turned. Not out of warmth, out of curiosity. I was the girl from the internet now. The one who aired dirty laundry in poetic form. The whispers started before I reached the third pew. She wrote that letter, didn't she? She's the disappointment who turned into a writer. But what struck me most wasn't the words. It was the silence of my mother when I approached her. No hug, no hello, just a glance. And then she turned away, as if I had no right to be there. As if my presence threatened the illusion they all worked so hard to maintain. I didn't cry, I didn't beg to belong. I sat through the entire service with my back straight and my heart steady. Because in that room full of silence, I heard something louder. I no longer needed their permission to exist. I wasn't the ghost at the table anymore. I was the storyteller, and storytellers don't wait for approval. They claim space. It came on a Tuesday. I was halfway through editing the final draft of my manuscript, a collection of essays called The Art of Being Overlooked, when the notification popped up. Subject line, TEDx invitation. We'd love to have you speak. I froze, reread it 3 times. It wasn't a scam, it wasn't a dream, it was real. They'd seen my story, my quotes, my posts, and they wanted me on that red dot. The email wasn't just an opportunity, it was a mirror, reflecting back a version of me I never thought I'd become. Not the disappointment, but the voice, a voice people trusted, a voice they wanted to amplify. I accepted the invitation without hesitation, and the next 3 months were a blur of rehearsals, rewrites, and doubt that crept in late at night, whispering, "Who do you think you are?" But every time that doubt came, I opened the messages I'd saved, notes from strangers, from students, from women in their 60s, from teenagers. Your words saved me. You wrote what I couldn't say. I no longer feel alone. And those voices drowned the old ones, the sighs, the sarcasm, the silence. On the day of the talk, I stood backstage with trembling hands, just like at the school assembly. But I wasn't scared. I was ready. I walked onto that stage, looked out at the lights, and spoke not just for me, but for every person who had ever been made to feel small. This time, no one ignored me. This time, the world leaned in. The TEDx talk was everywhere, shared, clipped, quoted. People called it raw, brave, necessary. My inbox exploded, but one message stopped me cold. It was from my mother. I stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. I watched your talk. I didn't know you felt that way. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. I see you now. No signature. Just that. A few sentences that hit harder than any silence ever did. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to go back in time and hear that when I was 10, 13, 17. But I also knew this. Sometimes we don't get the apology we wanted when we needed it most. We get it when we're strong enough to stand without it. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Let myself sit with it. Because healing isn't a rush. It's a choice, again and again. And I had built my life without waiting on her approval. I had bled, written, spoken my way out of the shadows. What I had now wasn't validation. It was truth. And I would never trade that for a seat at a table that once starved me. Still, something in me softened. Not for her, for me. Because grace isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to carry what never belonged to you. The book launched on a rainy Thursday. Fitting, really. Because storms had always been part of my story, but this one felt different. Cleansing, empowering. I walked into the bookstore, where rows of seats were filled with readers holding my book, my name on the cover, my words on their lips. People I didn't know, wearing my quotes on their shirts. I had spent years feeling like a ghost in my own life, and now I was everywhere. After the reading, an older woman came up to me. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "You wrote what I've been holding in for 40 years. Thank you." I nodded, speechless, because it wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. All of us who had ever been dismissed, diminished, overlooked. We had found each other in the pages. I left the bookstore alone, No cameras, no entourage, just me, and that was enough. I passed a cafe and saw a girl reading my book. She didn't notice me, and I didn't interrupt. I just smiled, because that was the moment I knew. I had written myself out of the cage they tried to keep me in. I didn't get revenge by tearing anyone down. I got it by rising. Quietly, powerfully, authentically. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I wrote. And now the world is quoting me.